these devastating waves of disease.
By the 18th century, we begin to see the description of forests, pristine forests.
From that time onwards, the idea of the forest that held sway in Europe, America, and even in Brazil itself was the Amazon as a pristine paradise, empty of people. And as the 20th century progressed, this empty land looked ripe for exploitation. In the 1970s, the military government of Brazil saw in the vastness of the Amazon an opportunity to expand the country's economy and solve the problem of a burgeoning population of landless peasants. Grand road-building projects were slicing through the forest to give access for the development of cattle ranches and farms.
It was a very interesting and probably not so good time for the Amazon in the 70s. There were many different programs going on to populate the Amazon. They thought it was a land without people. And so they were looking for people without land in several parts of Brazil and sending these people there.
But even as the trees were being felled, experts were questioning one of the basic assumptions behind the government's campaign, that the green forest meant fertile land. New research was revealing the unexpected nature of the Amazonian soils, and an American archaeologist called Betty Meggers would use this to redefine the way we think about the Amazon ecosystem.
The soil is very infertile, so you've got to fertilize it all the time. And then the first rain washes it out, so it's not a viable situation.
You've got high temperatures, you've had high rainfall there for many millions of years. So you've had chemical leaching, chemical weathering that has long since sort of weathered away and washed away all the valuable minerals and nutrients from the soil. And on top of that, you don't tend to get the accumulation of leaf litter and the organic humus that you find in this part of the world. Any organic material that falls onto the forest floor is very rapidly decomposed and recycled and put back into the living material again. So it ends up back in the trees very, very quickly.
And as the deforestation continued regardless, the scientists were proved right.
They cut down all the trees and the next crop was smaller, and then pretty soon the soil was exhausted and they didn't get anything. And everything that's been tried has demonstrated the non-feasibility of dense sedentary cultivation and so forth.
In other words, the forest may look lush, but it is not fertile. Or as Betty Meggers put it in 1971, the Amazon was a counterfeit paradise.
The idea of a counterfeit paradise. The idea that under that apparent, the apparent sense of abundance, of richness of resources lies a very fragile, frail and difficult environment to be managed by people.
In Meggers' view, the only kind of agriculture the Amazon could support was the kind of small-scale cultivation practiced by many of today's indigenous population. It's called slash-and-burn agriculture, and it's a way of farming sustainably on poor soil. A patch of forest is cleared, and the crops are grown until the soil is nearly exhausted.
At the end of 3 years, the fields stop producing, so they go cut another one and move around and have a territory in which, they can maintain a population that's sustainable. If they get too big a one, they're going to end up with people not having enough to eat.
So you would never establish a big settlement for a long period of time in the same place because you didn't have resources to maintain that group. So that was her first argument.
Betty Meggers subscribed to a mid-20th century school of thought that related the size and complexity of human societies to their environment. Harsh environments would limit the development of culture.
This theory also said that in the tropics, not only could humans not develop as a biological species, but humans could not develop their highest civilization.
As a counterfeit paradise, it was thought that the Amazon never had, never could, and never would sustain big or complex human populations. This theory added scientific credibility to the notion of pristine forest, at a time when opposition to the deforestation was mounting. The destruction of the Amazon became a focus of concern for many different groups and interests. Some NGOs collaborated with indigenous tribes and other poor forest communities, trying to protect these people and their lands from developers. Other NGOs took a more conventional approach to nature conservation, including some international wildlife conservationists.
Many people characterize development in the Amazon as fundamentally bad. Human impacts of any kind. The people who were doing biodiversity conservation were like, if it flies or walks on four legs, that's important. People are bad.
In the 70s, the Brazilian government began protecting some of the forest through the creation of national parks. They initially followed the American conservation model.
The old traditional approach to conservation, to national parks for example, has been to put up a fence around a particular plot of forest and to keep people out, and under the assumption that any kind of human land use is detrimental.
As a result, it became illegal for people, both indigenous and mixed-race forest communities, to live in the new parks.
Environmentalism can be a new form of imperialism. We see that kind of imperialism working at different levels, in an international level, but also in a local level here in Brazil. It amazes me today that conservation officials, they think that it's necessary to exclude traditional inhabitants, indigenous people or peasants, caboclos, mestizos, from conservation units. A lot of people, traditional inhabitants, peasants, mixed-blood people, have been living in those conservation units for decades or even centuries, and they're being kicked out now because these places are going to become national parks.
Against a backdrop of environmental concern, the destruction of the forest continued apace. Then, in a curious twist, the deforestation brought to light evidence that would challenge the beliefs of environmentalists, archaeologists, and even the developers. In 1986, the Brazilian geographer Alceu Hanzi was on a flight to Acre in the southwest Amazon when he spotted something unusual.
And he was sitting at the window seat and he saw this huge structure, very large. And then he realized there was not, a single site, that probably there were more. And so he rented an airplane and started flying around. And then he found more and more and more. And then he, as a geographer, he knew that was something very special. That was not natural, that probably was